Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next session. We're going to look at some of the most powerful pathways for preventing invasive plants, which is people, and how we talk about plants, how we buy them, how we grow them, and how we work together across the horticultural sector. As we know, invasive horticultural species don't spread on their own, and they move through language and through marketing, through well-intentioned planting decisions, and through gaps in public understanding. And that's why partnerships across education and industry, science and community action are so important in our toolbox for preventing invasive species. And today's speakers are going to walk us through this journey. So if you're in the audience right now, please pose your questions in the Q&A, and the presenters can answer them as we go along in the session. I'd like to introduce our first speakers. We have Ryan Godfrey, who is the Senior Specialist of Community Action at World Wildlife Canada, and Ellen Jakubowski, Communication Specialist at Public Engagement at the WWF. And their presentation will be around weeding through botanical terminology. You get some confusion around what is native, what do you mean by invasive, or even what a weed is. And these terms can create some confusion. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
All right, yeah. Cheers, Julian. Thanks for that intro. And hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. I gather there's about 150 of you out there here to learn and listen about invasive species, and that's awesome. That's just so cool. It's a pleasure for me to be kicking off this star-studded session with my colleague Ellen Jakubowski, who I'll be passing to in a little moment. And yeah, I'll start it off by just sharing my screen here. All right. Hopefully that looks good. Um, yeah. So as Julian mentioned, my name is Ryan Godfrey. I am a senior specialist on the community action team, but I also call myself the botanist in residence here at WWF Canada. So yeah, I do a whole bunch of different planty things, which includes native plants, sometimes includes invasive plants too. And I wanted to start off by just talking about the broad context of WWF's perspective in this work. So, we're a global organization at a chapter, WWF Canada, that works nationally. And our mission is to address the major challenges that are facing life on Earth. And, that includes habitat loss, it includes climate change, includes industrial pressures, and of course also includes invasive species too. And our vision is, we're working to get to a future where nature, wildlife, and people are all thriving together. It's a lofty goal, but I think we can get there together, and it's great to be among allies and friends who are, I think, working towards the same stuff. Our work is national, as I said, and for the past 5 years, it's been really aligned with the UN Decade on ecosystem restoration. So we've had a restoration focus. We've had these big goals. We call this our strategic plan, Regenerate Canada, to help restore 1 million hectares by 2030, steward 100 million hectares, and also reduce carbon emissions through nature-based climate solutions. Um, all that fun ecological stuff. And the way that this plays out in different landscapes can be really different. So some of it in maybe more rural, more northern areas of the country is like large scale ecosystem restoration stuff. So like seeding on the scale of many hectares or taking out dams or all kinds of that like large scale stuff. But we've also done an assessment that we call the restoration analysis of Canada that prioritized areas where restoration would be the most effective in Canada. And a lot of those areas turned out to be where people are living, the places that are human dominated landscapes, as we sometimes say, the places, in other words, where humans are the keystone species. Their human decisions, human behaviors are what determines what happens on that landscape. And so in that landscape, it becomes important to connect with those people. And how do we connect with people? We talk to them, we communicate, we use words. And so we have lots of different ways to do that on the community action team. We do blogs, we do webinars like this one, we do booths, and we also have an online learning hub called Regrow that we'll talk a little bit about later. But really, what we're trying to do is meet people where they're at and understand the general public, like what's going on with them. And and one of the things that we've found is that words can be tricky. Words can be real tricky. Um, Not everyone is using the same words in the same way, and that can sometimes mean that we're talking past each other, and that leads to less effective conservation outcomes. So it's an important problem and a problem that I'm not specifically trained to be able to resolve. And that's why I feel so lucky and grateful to have colleagues like Ellen Jakubowski on the communications team that can help me address these types of communication challenges. And so I'm going to pass it over to Ellen now to talk a little bit about, yeah, some of that work that we did together.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And yes, as Julian and Ryan mentioned, I'm a communications specialist working with Ryan at WWF Canada. Um, yeah, and so many folks today have already highlighted the importance of communication for addressing the problem of invasive species in Canada across the supply chain, communication and education where it comes to people who are growing plants, people who are selling plants in the horticultural industry, as well as the consumers who are buying the plants. So yeah, most of what we're going to look at today, we're going to look at some examples of articles that we've published recently on our blog at wwf.ca. And these are mostly aimed at the consumer side of things. But through all the different outreach and communications channels that Ryan mentioned, we do interface with people who, all different types of consumers who are buying plants, whether that's people who are at a garden center just shopping for something that they think looks nice, or people who are really, really into ecological gardening and they want to just like do the absolute most they can do to maximize their space to benefit wildlife and ecosystems. So I am just going to share my screen here, put up my first blog example up on screen. Um, so this blog is called Weeding Through Botanical Terminology. This is where we got the name of our presentation today. And this is really to address the problem we talked about at the top of like people not always using the same words to mean the same things, and it can create like a bit of a communication problem. Something that we've encountered is a lot of consumers, when they hear the word invasive, they don't think of necessarily like a plant that doesn't originate from North America. They think of just a plant that spreads really quickly. So this they'll often apply it to native plants as well as introduced plants. Whereas when we're talking about invasive plants, we're specifically talking about non-native plants that are harming the ecosystem or they're harming people in some way. So we decided to put together this glossary of terms just to explain like what do we at WWF mean when we're using these words. And this is now a resource that we can link to from some of our other articles whenever we need to explain this. So some of the terms we've got in here: native, near native, climate adapted, introduced species of plants, naturalized species, cultural, ornamental, invasive, of course, ruderal, and another one that we find a lot of people kind of get confused about, I guess, is weed. Not that they're confused, but it's just such a subjective term, right? So here we kind of explain that, there isn't like a botanical one right definition of what a weed is. It's not like a scientific um, thing that's uniform across the board, right? So yeah, and we kind of break down these groups based on like what these plants, how these plants are relating to their environments where they're found, and as well as the people in the areas where they're found as well. Um, yeah, and so a fun little exercise Ryan and I wanted to ask everybody to do today is to think about a plant species that I think we all know, which is the dandelion, Taraxacum officinale. Sorry, my Latin is not great. So what we'd like you to do is just pop into the chat and apply a couple of descriptors to that species. They could be words on this list like native, near native, climate adapted, or they could be other words that you know too. So we'd like to know how you would describe dandelion. What kind of a plant is that? And I'm not sure I can see everybody's answers right now while I'm sharing my screen. So I'm just going to kind of keep talking, but maybe we can take a look at those later. All right, so I'm going to share the next blog that I wanted to show you today. So we're kind of like going beyond just the terminology that we use to also look at some other kinds of barriers we've encountered when it comes to people who want to replace invasive plants with native plants and questions that they often have for us. Of course, it's our goal. We're trying to nudge them towards growing those native plants so they can create healthy habitats that are going to benefit native wildlife. So something that people ask us all the time is, where do you get native plants? And how do I know that they're the right native plants for the ecoregion where I live? And it's very difficult to offer blanket advice for that because every region is different. So what we kind of have done here is we have provided links to some directories that other people have put together. And I know we've already talked today about Network of Nature was a great resource we like to point people to. And we've also provided people with some questions that they can ask. Say they can't find any nearby nurseries listed here in their community. Well, they can go to their local nursery, their local garden center, and ask some questions that are going to help them understand, is this place likely to have suitable native plants for my ecoregion? So questions like, what proportion of the plants in stock here are native plants? Are they native to the region where we're in right now? How are they sourced? How are the pests managed where these plants were grown? Is there genetic variation? So we have this list of questions people can take when they go out and some guidance on like what types of answers they should be looking for, and also what they can do if, they encounter places where people don't have the answers to this question. Maybe they don't have answers that are totally satisfactory to the person asking them. And we really just encourage people to kind of open a dialogue and just to showcase that there is demand for native plants, just to say, look, I would really like to buy this, that, and the other species of native plant. It also came up earlier today that demand helps to drive the supply. So we do encourage people to start those conversations wherever they're shopping for their plants. All right, just one more blog that I wanted to show everyone today. This one's called 6 Neighbor-Friendly Tips for How to Help Wildlife at Home. Another barrier that in our conversations with folks that we've become aware of is people are a little hesitant sometimes to plant native plants and create a wildlife garden. They worry, like, just depending on where you live, sometimes the neighborhood has a certain aesthetic. Things might be very manicured with a lot of, beautiful ornamentals, and they might just feel like, oh, my native plants might look out of place, or some of my like more natural gardening practices of letting things go a little bit, letting nature take its course might conflict with that, or they might even worry, which because it does happen, that bylaw enforcement is going to come knock on their door if they're not upholding the aesthetic of the neighborhood. So we also put together some tips here that are just like kind of light lift things for people to try that are like, it can be as simple as like, you just have part of your yard you're dedicating to wildlife, and you're kind of labeling it as such with a sign so people can see, okay, this is why it looks a certain way. We can do what Ryan likes to call business in front, party in the back. If you're fortunate to have a front and backyard, you can keep the front nice and tidy, and then let the backyard just, become a beautiful natural wonderland. Just being active out in the yard, talking to your neighbors about why you're doing things. Just generally like, because and something else we encourage people to do is to talk to their municipal governments if necessary, if there is a problem with bylaws being enforced that are not in step with more ecologically friendly landscaping practices, or maybe there's a discrepancy between what the bylaws are and like how they're being enforced. So yeah, we encourage that as well. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Ryan, can we go back to the slide deck, please?
Sure
Just to
thing.
summarize some of our approach here, our current approach, I should say, because we are always learning and improving things as well. So basically, like if we had to make some recommendations, because I know there's others who are probably communicating about this as well in hopes of encouraging people to like take out invasive plants and put in some native ones for wildlife. So I'd say that gardening is a very unifying topic. So um, unlike certain topics that can be very controversial, um, gardening is nice because it unites across like political divisions. For example, everybody likes to get out there and enjoy that connection with nature and being outdoors and exercise. So that's something you can definitely lean into in communications. We definitely, like others have said, we aim to educate and not shame people because people don't like that. They don't like being told what to do or what they're doing is bad. So we'd also say like it's not an all or nothing thing. You don't have to commit to going 100% naturalized in your garden. Just start with a few plants and pots like you can see in the picture. Yeah, someone's saying we don't all garden the same way. That's very true, right? So it's like find a way to integrate these native plants that works for you. I think we're just about out of time. I don't know if we have time for Ryan to just get to the last slide there.
Oh, let me maybe just one quick minute. Thanks, Ellen. And by the way, folks were answering about dandelions, and we ran the whole gamut. It was all the terms. Everyone was there. It's great. So thanks to everyone for participating there. I just wanted to wrap up by saying that the sort of culmination of my botanical knowledge and research and Ellen's communications expertise can be found at our platform Regrow here. If you just search WWF Regrow, you'll find it. It's our online learning and actions hub for all things native plant gardening and wildlife gardening. And there's a lot to say about this. It's really cool. There's a map. There's collective impacts. There's more coming all the time. There's a contest running right now, and we would love to have more people on the platform. So you all in the audience today, we would love it if you would share this resource amongst your network. And yeah, with that, I'd just like to say thanks very much for having us here to be part of this wonderful event. Cheers and thanks.
Thanks, Ryan and Ellen, for sharing. I'm definitely one of those people that support the business in the front, party in the back with the native renaturalization. Um, like I said, with the audience, if you have any questions, put them in the Q&A. We're going to move on to the next session, and then if we have some time at the end, then we can bring everyone together and answer collectively. So for our next speakers, we have uh, Kathy Cavasalis and Claudette Sims, who are co-founders of the Canadian Coalition for Invasive Plant Regulation. They're also master gardeners of Ontario, and the presentation is called Everyday Heroes, Partnering with Nature to Stop the Spread of Invasive Plants. So let's welcome these everyday heroes and hear their story.
Hello, and I hope you can see my slides okay?
Yes, we can see your slides.
Okay, great. Well, I want to thank you for joining me and Claudette today to celebrate some everyday heroes who are partnering to stop the spread of invasive plants. Faced with the seemingly intractable problems invasive plants create, these folks are beacons, lighting our path forward. They're not superheroes in capes, but everyday people like you and me, working to safeguard nature, our life support system, and helping to shape a better future for all of us. And in these times, we need heroes. The world is changing. Every day we see political instability, economic uncertainty, and a changing climate bringing fires and floods and unpredictable seasons. We see wildlife populations declining, and we know invasive species are accelerating the stresses already placed on our land and water systems. Whoops, sorry, wrong way. We're living in a moment where evidence is confronting us with something deeply uncomfortable. The gardens we love and have become pathways for harm. No gardener wants to hear this. Gardening is how many of us find joy, create beauty, and build community. Yet we now know that many familiar and sometimes beloved ornamentals are invasive plants, causing harm to our ecosystems, our economy, and public well-being. So this is not about blame. It's about seeing something we didn't see before and using that knowledge to do better. Somewhere along the line, plants became products selected for novelty, color, hardiness, and convenience, and were marketed as if they were interchangeable with existing native plants. In that shift, we lost sight of something essential. Each plant species plays specific roles in living systems. Plants move energy and nutrients through complex food webs, and in the process have formed these long evolved partnerships with fungi, soil organisms, pollinators, and other animals. When we choose invasive plants that disrupt these long established relationships, negative consequences ripple outward. Now, recognizing that gardening has created a pathway for harm can feel overwhelming. But acknowledging this truth doesn't signal an end to gardening. It moves us toward gardening with intention, gardening that supports, restores, and strengthens the living world around us. Gardeners and everyone who grows, sells, designs, or manages plants can be heroes, powerful agents of prevention and healing. We are far from helpless bystanders. We are participants, partners in nature. Now, gardening that protects and heals nature begins with understanding the roles plants play in natural systems. Well-known scientists like Dr. Doug Tallamy have helped reveal how plant choice shapes the very architecture of life, and it determines which insects and birds can call a place home. His research has shown us why plant choice truly matters. But he's not alone. Many lesser-known scientists, like Nadia Kavlin, who's going to speak next, are doing equally critical work. They're quiet heroes. They walk our landscapes, documenting which horticultural plants begin to slip beyond the garden gates and do harm. Her research is strengthened by everyday heroes, the land stewards, naturalists, and community scientists who notice an unfamiliar seedling in a ravine and make the effort to report them. Then experts like Stephen Smith can use this evidence to build prioritization lists, practical guides that help growers, gardeners, and land managers recognize high-risk species and make informed decisions. The work of these heroes gives us the knowledge we need, but it's our responsibility to use it. Now, science matters most when we can use it, and educators, including master gardeners, play critical roles in translating research into practical, usable advice. People like Claudette Sims, who's here with me today, work to explain the harms caused by invasive plants and help dispel persistent myths like, it's not invasive in my backyard. Her efforts are visible in shifting social media conversations, where members of the public now jump in to point out invasive species and share credible information on how to manage them. In Manitoba, Master Gardener Linda Dietrich, who I also see online today, brought together gardeners and professionals to talk openly about invasive plant prevention. The result was increased awareness and real change within the broader gardening community. Claudette and Linda are just two among hundreds of educators working every day to turn information into understanding, and that understanding is what turns knowledge into action. Changing how people see gardening is one of the most powerful drivers of change. Writers like Monica Rekola and artists like Rita Rekola help people reimagine gardening, not as decoration, but as a relationship with nature. They influence what people notice, what they value, and what they ultimately look for and ask for in garden centers. To protect the living systems we depend on, we must shift the values that guide our choices. And that's what these heroes do. Culture shifts when what we value shifts. And those shifts deepen when people begin sharing their stories, because Personal stories show firsthand the ecological, financial, and emotional consequences of invasive plants. When someone explains how a perfect ground cover became a perfect nightmare, the issue stops being abstract. It becomes familiar, relatable, and harder to dismiss. Journalist Julianne Lebrecq recognizes the power of stories, and she's gathered accounts from across the country, connecting evidence with lived experience and giving voice to the people confronting invasive plants in their own communities. Stories change minds, and stories change behaviors. But to really change how we garden, people need alternatives. And this is where everyday heroes like Abby Obenchain and Andrea Eastman, who spoke earlier, come in. Abby has created Grow Me Instead Guide, one for her community in Sault Ste. Marie. And this gives gardeners practical, beautiful, ecologically sustainable alternatives to invasive plants. Across the country, more regional Grow Me Instead guides are emerging, each one giving people the confidence to choose plants that support nature rather than undermine it. Because knowing what to plant is what empowers action. With these choices, landscape designers are proving something important. You can create beautiful, resilient, biodiversity supporting gardens without invasive plants. Designers like Sean James show that ecological design is not a constraint, it's an opportunity. His work is reshaping expectations for what gardens can be and showing us that landscape design can be a lever for change. For those who aren't professional designers, authors and experts like Lorraine Johnson and Sheila Kola translate ecological science into everyday guidance for gardeners and providing garden plans. I want to take a moment and just honor Sheila Kola. Her research has deepened our understanding of plant pollinator relationships, and her recent passing has been a profound loss. These heroes have shown us what regionally appropriate gardening looks like. And while we can't all write books, we can all put ideas into practice and inspire greater change. And change is what's happening within communities of practice across Canada, within garden clubs, volunteers like Leanne Crane and Barb Wilson, Marie Decker. They're updating plant sale guidelines. They're redesigning public gardens, modernizing horticultural society logos to reflect changing understanding and changing values. These leaders work within trusted organizations, and their choices ripple outward, shaping entire communities. Change is also coming from within horticultural trades. Some nurseries have voluntarily stopped selling well-recognized invasive plants. Some retailers are adding labels to help customers make informed choices. And some leaders within industry associations like Art van den Enden are working to dry up demand for high-risk species. These early adopters show that responsible horticulture isn't just possible, it's already happening. All this voluntary action is important, but it has its limits. That's why ecologists like Dr. Brendan Samuels and the Ecological Design Lab are calling for regional bylaws to address gaps created by uneven provincial rules and the lack of coordinated federal oversight. They recognize legally protecting biodiversity and preventing the spread of invasive plants is essential for safeguarding ecosystems. But legislative action requires public pressure. And public pressure can only increase thanks to engaged citizens like Lynn Patnode. She's calling for updated regulations and clearer guidance in her city of Ottawa. Her kind of local leadership builds public pressure, and that pressure drives change. The results of growing pressure are visible across Canada. Quebec has just proposed a new provincial regulation to restrict the sale and spread of invasive plants. Nanaimo is drafting a new local ordinance to prohibit the sale of high-risk species. Municipalities in Ontario like Ottawa, Thunder Bay, Kingston, why, they're developing yard-level measures to tackle the problem. But importantly, in the small municipality of Bluewater, councillors looked squarely at the issue and said, We can't do this alone. They recognize that the scale of the problem is greater than any one community can bear. And so they took a heroic step. They passed a CIPR drafted petition calling on the federal government to fix Canada's fragmented, inconsistent, and reactive approach to invasive plant prevention. Everyday heroes. Well, they act on evidence. They act ahead of policy, and they show that the market is ready for change, and they prove change is possible. But as Blue Water recognized, even heroic work has limits. No single gardener, retailer, municipality can do this alone. Prevention requires partnership. And this is where CIPR comes in. We are a coalition of everyday heroes, volunteers from across the country working to stop the spread of invasive plants at the source. We recognize that Canada needs better coordination across jurisdictions, shared, reliable plant risk information, mandatory screening of plants in and entering the trades, and legislative reform to prevent the sale of plants known to create harms, and this will require all of us. We've created a roadmap forward, and you can read more details on our CIPR website. CIPR recognizes that real change comes from individuals acting together to protect nature, the living systems we depend on. Every one of us can be an everyday hero by helping prevent the spread of invasive plants. So I invite you to join us. Add your voice, share the evidence, share the solutions, help transform individual heroic efforts into a coordinated national response, guided by science and our shared commitment to care for the living world. Thank you, and I'll stop sharing my slides now.
Thank you, Kathy. Very inspiring. Prevention requires partnership, and really enjoyed your framing of ecological design is not a constraint, but an opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking. We're going to move into our next session, which is going to be, we have at the national level, Gabby Nichols, the program manager at Invasives Canada, followed by Vicky Simkovic, the coordinator at Ontario Invasive Plant Council. And then we'll be hearing from Nick Wong, Manager, Science and Research at the Invasive Species Council of BC. The theme of the conversation will be centered around PlantWise and Grow Me Instead.
Excellent. Thank you, Julian, for the introduction. I'm going to go through my notes pretty quickly here because I think Vicky and Nick, who follow me, have a lot more great detail to share. But this is more of an update of what's going on at the national level with Invasives Canada. So just a very quick, Invasives Canada is the national voice and hub to protect Canada from the impacts of invasive species. We're guided by a diverse board and work to create collaborative tools to deliver, to really help stimulate action and support industry as well as the public to make changes to reduce the spread of invasive species. Just highlighting here our strong chapter network. We're still working to build chapters in the rest of the provinces and territories, but this is a really important piece to how we connect with work on the ground and really helps with implementation on the ground and sort of the back and forth of communication and information from the national level to the provincial to territorial level. Invasives Canada often focuses on our key pathways of spread, as we call them, through our national Take Action programs. Here's just a list of some of those pathways that we focus on to really work on the prevention side of invasive species and help find solutions by closing pathways, reducing future costs, such as management. For example, when invasive pests are transported in firewood, this can cause impacts to forests and a lot of bigger costs down the road. So prevention is a side we really like to focus on. Excuse me. Many of you have already likely heard, and it's kind of been sprinkled in some of the conversation today about the PlantWise and Grow Me Instead programs. So PlantWise originated in Australia with their Grow Me Instead, or I should say Grow Me Instead originated in Australia. And in 2009, Invasive Species Council of BC adopted the program and built it into PlantWise, which then was adopted at the national level. Since then, a lot of our chapters have taken on PlantWise and or Grow Me Instead and have been working to spread the word across the country. PlantWise is voluntary, and Grow Me Instead are all about regionally adapted resources, providing plant alternatives that are similar to where they grow and the look of their invasive counterparts. So really working with industry at the retail level, as well as gardeners and customers to kind of shift what they purchase. Nationally, we've been working on this since 2018 with a national working group that was started then. This group made some really great progress by developing the National Voluntary Code of Conduct, as well as Canada's Worst Invasive Plant List, which really just was a communication resource to highlight some of those main species that we should look to start finding alternatives for and phase out. Again, this program is completely voluntary, signing up as the code of conduct, and is really not meant to be a burden on industry, but really support industry or support leadership within industry. So recently, we've reestablished our working group, which I'll talk about in just a moment. But we've developed some recent resources, including disposal guidance for home gardeners, templated resources for some of our chapters, as well as some social campaigns on seed packets and weeds in your bird seeds, which are sort of related to the garden conversation. Excuse me. 1 moment. Sorry, all of a sudden I have a frog in my throat. So just very quickly, we've reestablished our National Horticulture Working Group with some new objectives and sort of reinvigorated action. The partners that are on the working group include the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, Canadian Nursery Landscape Association, Canadian Food Inspection Agency, and some of our invasive species chapters. This is really meant to be an industry-led, science-informed, nationally coordinated group to really make some impacts on the ground. I won't get too into it here because I know Vicki will speak to it, but the big initiative of the group currently is to create standardized guidance on what species make it onto different lists, whether that's Grow Me Instead alternatives or which species are considered invasive. It's really making sure that we have the right partners, including industry, at the table to make those decisions and really create those standards and criteria for how these lists are made. So really trying to create more clear guidance for industry members and others in terms of invasive species and plants. And it wouldn't be without our chapters to help us implement these. So just wanted to again highlight the PlantWise and Grow Me Instead work that's being done by all of our chapters here. Looking forward, just to reiterate, we're looking to provide consistent guidance on invasive lists and alternatives, build training and resources for retailer-customer interface, update landscape industry training, and improve cross-sector collaboration, which is a lot of what we heard today. And you can learn more at plantwise.ca, just there, and certainly reach out if you have any questions. But with that, I'm going to pass it off to Vicki to talk about the Ontario Invasive Plant Council's work in this space.
Great, thank you very much, Gabby. My presentation is very much going to segue into going to be talking a bit about touching on the national PlantWise as well. Okay, perfect. So good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're enjoying the meeting so far. For this presentation, I'm going to go over our Grow Me Instead program, providing background and some updates on one of our most successful outreach initiatives. So the Grow Me Instead program was launched in 2010 by the Horticultural Outreach Collaborative, which is a committee of the OIPC focusing on the horticultural pathway of spread. The Grow Me Instead guides were created through a collaborative approach with partners of the HOC that included member representatives from NGOs, academic institutes, and government agencies in Ontario. The concept of GMI was adapted from ISC's BC's GMI booklet. So as they began developing it in 2009, we then 2010 began adopting it in our own time. And that was adapted from similar programs in Australia as well. The guide was created with the goal of assisting gardeners in making informed decisions about the plants they're buying for their gardens, helping them to avoid purchasing invasive plants. It was also aimed at nurseries and retailers, providing them options for non-invasive plant alternatives to reduce the sale of invasive plants. So the guides were essentially directed at two audiences, both the consumer level and the grower seller. Due to differences in habitats across Ontario, we have a guide that focuses on the needs for Southern Ontario. We also have a French version of the Southern Guide and a Northern Ontario Guide version. And all of these are available to download for free on our website. So just a quick breakdown. So the Northern and Southern guides includes photos and descriptions of invasive or unwanted and non-invasive or native species. And they're broken down into different sections like aquatics, trees and shrubs, and vines and ground covers, etc. The Southern GMI guide has 28 invasive species listed with 76 non-invasive alternatives. The alternatives were chosen based on whether they were non-invasive or native. So note that not all alternatives were native per se. Sometimes it wasn't always possible to pair an unwanted species with a native equivalent. Some other criteria included that the alternative species was relatively easily found in the horticultural industry, or it was working towards more widespread availability, and that the native or the alternative had similar requirements, shape, and garden use as the potentially invasive species. So over the years, GMI resources have been very popular and successful. Thousands of people have picked up paper copies of the Grow Me Instead guide, which were commonly distributed at events in person in the past, such as like CD Saturdays and Master Gardener events. And to highlight a few figures from 2010 to 2020, over 70,000 GMI guides were distributed at numerous horticultural trade shows across Ontario. Other resources we've had that accompany the Grow Me Instead guides include our bookmarks and seed packets. And we've also presented countless workshops in person and remotely throughout the years, and we continue to actively promote GMI on our social media. We also had the GMI Nursery Recognition Program, which was active from 2012 to 2015, that recognized invasive-free nurseries, garden centers, landscaping, and restoration services, and provided a variety of GMI materials to distribute. We also hosted GMI field tours in the past during our annual OIPC conferences when they were in person, where attendees could visit invasive-free nurseries and field sites that are demonstrating invasive species impacts on restoration. And so looking ahead into the future, over the 15 years since the first edition, there have been a number of updates for the Southern Guide. We unfortunately haven't updated the Northern Guide yet, but with the Southern Guide, gradually there have been more species added or substituted. And in the new year, we're excited to begin the next Grow Me Instead update. So for this update, there have been a number of exciting changes. So first, the update's going to be overseen through national leadership with the Invasives Canada Plant-Wise National Program. And the Ontario Grow Me Instead program as a whole is now part of this broader national program called Plant-Wise. And over the years of delivering the GMI program, there have been some key lessons learned. One of them is the importance of a collaborative approach. So when developing a task force for Grow Me Instead guides and updates, it's really important to ensure a broad diversity across sectors have been represented, including industry. Also, the need for standardized Grow Me Instead lists. There are so many invasive plant lists floating around out there. It can get quite confusing. So it's important to have a standardized way for how these lists are put together. So for this reason, the Invasives Canada National Task Force has developed a standardized species selection criteria. So the purpose of this criteria is to develop a more standardized way to define what unwanted and alternative species are and what species are included in the guide, so that in this way, the guides can be locally adapted to various regions across different councils in a more standardized way. This ensures more consistent messages across regional groups in Canada. So we are in the process of putting together a task force for the new Ontario Grow Me Instead guide update. The members of this task force will assist in a thorough review and update of the guide in the coming year, reflecting the latest science and industry best practices. A key aspect is that this task force will consist of members from diverse sectors, ensuring regional representation and a broad range of expertise, particularly from industry stakeholders like garden centers and landscape architects, and also representatives from NGOs, Indigenous organizations, and community groups and horticulturalists. Um, we're, we are we also have several new branding and supporting Grow Me Instead materials that we developed over the course of this year. So as Gabby mentioned that in her presentation as well, we have the Ontario-based disposal document, bookmarks, and plant stakes that we will hope to post along with our updated guide on our website in the coming year. So thanks very much for listening.
All righty. Well, yeah, thanks so much for having me today. So yeah, my name's Nick Wong, and I'm the Manager of Science and Operations and Training at the ISCBC. First, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm coming to you live today from the ancestral, unceded, and traditional territory of the Silks Okanagan peoples in Penticton, BC. So my really short presentation here is going to focus on two components of our plant-wise behavior change program, the Grow Me Instead guide and our recognized retailer program. Yeah, so we're Canada's largest provincial invasive species charity, and similar to Vicky and Gabby, focus on education, outreach, do some training and some cross-border collaboration. And yeah, I'm grateful to work with Rebecca and Gabby and Chris and Julian pretty often. So I will get cracking. So yeah, our Grow Me Instead guide, has been mentioned, was kind of first developed back in 2008. And as many of you know, it's for that gardener audience to provide the alternative plants to plant instead of the invasives found in the industry. In our current version of the guide, there's been quite a few iterations since that first one, and it was most recently updated in 2021, and it includes up to 33 invasive species that we're watching out for in BC. That 2021 update also included the addition of pond plants, trees, and green roof plants. So yeah, that was a good addition. So this is just a quick look at the snapshot guide, the brochure that's available on our website and as a physical resource, but we also have a full online guide. The brochure itself just features two alternates for each invasive, but the full guide on our website has more information, including the description of the invasive plant and its impacts, a wider selection of plant alternatives for each invasive, info on their growing zones within the province, the soil and light conditions they best grow in, and other features each plant alternative has, such as whether they're fire smart or pollinator friendly, whether they're drought or mammalian browsing resistant, that kind of information. So for a lot of our projects and programs, much like my co-speakers here, we convene and work with subject matter experts through advisory teams. And since September, we've been working with a really great group of experts to update this Grow Me Instead guide. So the first thing off, the group was tasked with revising the invasive species and alternate species selection criteria. And then we're getting stuck in right now, reviewing all the invasives, and alternative species list. And we really hope to have this all revised and ready for next year. So as mentioned, we have a really diverse group. We have 12 different organizations taking part, all working through consensus to update the Grow Me Instead guide. So we've got folks from the provincial government, regional invasive species organizations, and other NGOs, academia, industry, including garden centers and nurseries, seed wholesalers, and as well as Indigenous native plant nurseries. So we're getting a lot of really great perspectives, and I think we're covering it pretty well. So as mentioned, we reviewed the first step was to review the invasive species criteria. So first off, it has to be a species that is currently or has been recently available for purchase in BC, whether that's through retail, wholesales, could be e-commerce, privately traded through seed swaps or flea markets, Facebook Marketplace, these types of things. And then in addition to that criteria, it must follow, at least be listed on our provincial priority invasive species list, which is developed by the BC Interministry Invasive Species Working Group. It could be currently listed in or unwanted on lists in adjacent jurisdictions surrounding BC. Or if the advisors agree by consensus, it should be listed due to its likelihood of being introduced or established in BC. Second of which, we did the similar exercise for the alternates. So they were open to native and non-native species. But it has to, the species has to meet some other criteria. So it's not invasive locally, provincially, or nationally. No potential to become invasive when considering its ecology. The proposed alternative is a hybrid of an invasive, so ensuring there's sterility or to eliminate the risk of crossbreeding with invasives of concern. It needs to be readily accessible. It should share similar characteristics or cultural properties as the unwanted plant and considers regionality and tolerates the same range of climatic and environmental conditions. So from our 2021 list, these were the 8 species that were flagged for review that we're discussing with the group, doing our sort of background research, and again we'll determine if these ones are going to remain. Yeah, the addition of foxglove in the 2021 update caused quite a bit of noise, I would say, through media and government folks and all kinds of places. So it's an interesting one. So in addition to the Grow Me Instead update, we're looking to update our recognized retailer program next year. So we ran the pilot back in 2023 alongside Invasives Canada with a provincial and national advisory group that included invasive species organizations, garden and horticultural businesses, the UBC Botanical Garden, and FireSmart BC. At the national level, I think we also worked with staff from the Nova Scotia and New Brunswick Invasive Species Councils, member of the Canadian Society of Landscape Architects, and as well as a senior consultant with Canadian Tire. So I think, as many of you know, this really aims to raise awareness among garden retailers about the impacts of invasives and the importance of responsible plant ownership. So the components of this program included some e-learning courses, a bunch of comprehensive resources for staff and customers. We do and plan to provide ongoing support as the council, and a recognition component to acknowledge participating retailers. So yeah, again, the program is voluntary, and those that do join are encouraged to sign the code of conduct, which provides guidelines and best practices for preventing, detecting, and controlling invasives in the Canadian landscape. So what are the retailers getting out of this? So they're supported to identify invasive species in their inventory. And then we kind of work with them. Hopefully they're willing to sort of label some of these troubling species and try and phase their sale out over time. Throughout the program, there's opportunities to educate their staff and training opportunities provided by the ISCBC, and subsequently support the extension of all this info to their customers moving forward. So based on the learnings and recommendations from the 2023 pilot, we're going to implement all of this feedback into the 2026 program, and we're hoping to launch this new update initially focused in 2 regions of BC, in the Okanagan and the Caribou regions, and working with the regional invasive species organizations in those areas. So what are we planning to do? We'll be hosting some collaborative workshops with those RISOs, we call them, to sort of enhance and share the messaging in action, host industry and gardener workshops, and yeah, be pretty active in this space over 2026 and 2027. So yeah, if you're keen to know more, we'd love to hear from you. But if you have any questions about the Grow Me Instead guide, you'd be more than willing to please email me. And regarding the Recognized Retailer Program, I have my colleague Lindsay Barnett, and our emails are there. But yeah, that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you to all of our presenters in this part of the session. I'm really excited to hear about all the updates that are happening with Grow Me Instead. There are a lot of questions in the chat, and I would invite folks from the panel to answer them as we move along. Uh, I'd like to pass it on to Vicky to continue our next section with exploring more solutions.
Thank you, Julian. Yeah, so for this next session, we're continuing with exploring solutions. We're going to be looking at groups that are exploring and actively working on solutions to the problem of horticultural invasive plants and their spread. So we're going to be hearing about a great detection alert system that's happening in the botanical gardens. How do we track the spread of new invasions and prevent them from entering our natural areas, as well as learning about a national native seed strategy. So with that, I would like to introduce Teresa Cully, Professor of Plant Biology at the University of Cincinnati, and Michelle Bellascour, Coordinator at the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, and they will discuss emerging species alert systems in botanical gardens, public gardens as sentinels against invasive plants, a growing network with new resources. So welcome, Teresa and Michelle. Looking forward to hearing this presentation.
Great. Thank you so much. So we want to tell you about what we think, we're completely biased, but is a really interesting effort and something we've been doing under the auspices of the Midwest Invasive Plant Network. And that is trying to use public gardens as a way, as sentinels for detecting potentially problematic plants that become invasive. And so this is a presentation that I will start, and then Michelle will hop onto, and then I can answer questions. So feel free to put questions in the chat as we go along. So on the next slide, what I wanted to show you here is that the reason public gardens are involved is, if you think about it, horticulture can be one of the pathways of invasive plant introductions. And shown here are data from a study I did with an excellent undergraduate student a few years ago. But essentially what we did was we took the 295 species that are currently listed as invasive by the states that comprise the Midwest Invasive Plant Network, and that's all available on our website. And we classified and separated those into woody, vines, and herbaceous. And for each of those, we did a literature review, and we looked to see what in the literature told us about why these plants were introduced and also their use. And so what you can see for woody plants, we have 3 different categories. On the left is intentional introductions, the middle is accidental, and then we also had unknown, where sometimes it was just difficult for a handful of species to find out why it was actually introduced. The point here is you could see that for woodies, 89% again of woody known invasive species have a current or past history with horticultural use. If we look at vines, it's not as high, but it's still pretty substantial. 65% of currently recognized invasive vines have some link with horticulture. And with herbaceous species, which by the way isn't oftentimes studied, we show that it's 31% of recognized invasive herbs have some link with horticulture. So that's why it's really important to be thinking about this. So on the next slide, what you could see is, well, why is horticulture involved? And it turns out that many of the traits that are associated with invasiveness are also those types of things that your average gardener wants and desires. So especially if they have a brown thumb, they can't grow things. They want something that you can't kill. They want plants with wide ecological tolerance, something that will grow really fast, be really beautiful with lots of flowers. We also know that many invasive species, birds, plants, animals, all different types, are associated with multiple introductions. And what better pathway through the commercial horticultural pathway? And then finally, there's a lot of evidence that for specific types of plants that become invasive, the reason behind it, or one of the reasons, is because there's cultivars planted nearby and they're cross-pollinating each other. So this sort of refers a little bit to the previous talk. And so because we have this association with horticultural plants and invasiveness, that's why we started to think about gardens. So public gardens in Arboretum. It turns out, if you think about this, these gardens are perfectly positioned to act in this role as sentinels of plant invasion. So gardens have many different introduced species from around the world. They are oftentimes grown in these curated living collections. We have staff that take care of those collections. We have individual plants where they're tagged. We know the provenance, we know where it came from. There's oftentimes a history of what happened to that particular plant. Some gardens also have natural areas. So if something's going to escape, it's most likely going to escape into that natural area. And then the other really important part, and this is part of the effort that Michelle is going to talk about next, is on the next slide, you can see that gardens are actually located all around the world. And if we just think, though, about North America, here's an example of the number of different gardens. And so if we can have these gardens all communicating together and sharing information on plants that are escaping cultivation within their gardens, this would be a huge asset, and is a huge asset that is developing today. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelle, and she'll tell you a little bit more details about our project and our network.
Yeah, thanks, Teresa. Yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about how gardens participate in this program, the kind of the nuts and bolts of it. Basically, gardens use a set of guidelines that was developed by our program's working group to create a list of plants that they're concerned about. Most of the time, these are plants that they have seen escaping from their collections, and they rank them relative to their degree of concern. So maybe a watch list if they're just kind of continue monitoring it, to potentially invasive, to invasive. And those are generally things that are also naturalized in the landscape. Then they upload that information to a controlled access database. And what our working group does is, as that data set has grown, which we're very excited about, we kind of go through that accumulated data, and we're able to share information about specific plants' capacity to become invasive, and then recommend actions to a whole variety of stakeholder groups. And these are just some of those groups, including invasive plant councils. We're very excited to be talking to this audience in particular. Actually, yesterday, Teresa and I independently talked to the Ohio Invasive Plant Council, and then the Illinois Council, and just a couple weeks before that, California. So we're really excited to be talking to this particular part of the network. But we're also really interested in getting this information in the hands of nurseries and propagators. As we've heard many times today, these are people's livelihoods, and we want to work with them, and we want to get information on problematic plants to them as early as we possibly can, so that they can incorporate that information into their business plans. Similarly, landscape architects, we want to get them that information so that if they need to make adjustments to their project plans, they have more time to do that. And we're really excited because we're funded currently by the U.S. Forest Service to be building some bridges between our program and state and regional foresters in the new year. But as I said, the information and the raw data is only accessible to gardens, but through talking to these different stakeholder groups, we've developed this dashboard, which is publicly available. So anyone can go and take a look at this, and it's updated live. So it shows how many gardens we currently have participating, which is almost 70 now. All the different highlighted states and provinces show where we have gardens that are participating, so you get a sense of the regionality of the data. And then probably the most interesting part is the graph at the bottom, which shows which taxa are most commonly recorded to our database. We're going to talk about a few of these today. Our still reigning champion is Amur cork tree. That's the first one you see here. We've had 14 of our 68 gardens have said it's problematic. We also have Japanese tree lilac and golden rain tree kind of coming up in second place here. And then you'll see maybe some other common names here: buckthorn, Callery pear, some euonymus species, and others. So we encourage you to visit this website, because it's always being updated. The other cool thing is you can actually select specific states or provinces or groups of regional areas, and this graph you'll see updates accordingly. And Ontario gets a lot of credit because they have one of the most largest participation from public gardens in our program. So way to go, Ontario. Almost 200 records are coming from Ontario gardens. And you can see common buckthorn is the most commonly reported, but that Japanese tree lilac pops up again in second place. And then we also have things like black locust, Siberian squill, and others that you're probably familiar with. But going back to the ones that are most problematic across all of our gardens, just to kind of show you what we can do with this information, that 14 gardens, that's again the most that have reported on a single species, this Amur cork tree. And in the bubble here shows you whether or not that plant is recognized as invasive. I think this is just US states, but I also have some information in later slides on how things are recognized in Ontario. But you see pretty good agreement here that Amur cork tree gardens are seeing it's problematic, states are agreeing. Many of the states are agreeing that it's problematic. Golden rain tree, 11 gardens say it's problematic, but only 6 states recognize it as problematic. So this might be an opportunity. One of the reasons that this program is so beneficial is that gardens often are seeing these problems before they become more widely recognized. And that's even more apparent here with Japanese tree lilac. We've got 10 gardens saying that it's problematic, but it's only recognized by one state, which I believe is Maine. But I do know it's also on the Ontario invasive plant list as a level 3, I believe, a local concern. So talking a little bit more about that rain tree, or Japanese tree lilac, sorry. So gardens have mostly said that this is potentially invasive, so they're giving it kind of a moderate level of concern. You can see from the map of where it's been reported from our program, there's a certain regionality to it, right? Kind of this northeast quadrant of the US as well as Ontario. And what's interesting, if you want to learn more about what's happening with this plant, is there are several groups in New York, invasive species management programs, that are monitoring and managing this plant because they've seen a lot of spread along riparian corridors and floodplains. So if you want to learn more, I think that's a good place to check out. And then based on all this information that has come together, we've created a plant alert on this species that was just issued a couple months ago. The front page of our alerts just showcase what gardens have told us about this plant, and then it has recommended actions. Now, for something like this, we're not necessarily stamping it as invasive. We're really focused on getting more information. We want to see more public gardens monitoring and reporting about this plant. We would recommend eradicating any spontaneous populations so that we don't want to, have any continued spread, and it might be an opportunity to look at reduced fertility cultivars as well. And then on the reverse side of each alert, there's a little bit of basic information about the plant, but we really try to focus on sort of what's unique about it and things that might be important when it comes to making decisions about it and management. Golden rain tree is kind of an interesting one. This has not been reported in Ontario, but it has been reported in New York and Wisconsin, so I think it's important to be aware of in your region. It's mostly coming in as a watch list species, so a little bit lower level of concern. But I think what's interesting here is just the number of different areas where it has been shown to be problematic. There's a lot of variety there. So a plant that can be so successful in so many different environments, I think is worth paying attention to. And so we also did an alert on this plant, and it's very similar in the sense that we're putting this information out there to try and get more information about this plant, more reporting, but also probably managing any spontaneous populations is a good idea. Now, going back to kind of what was most commonly reported in Ontario, and I got to go quick because I think we're running out of time here. Common buckthorn, what did I say? Japanese tree lilac we've talked about already. Black locust was also kind of at the top of that list. And then below here, you can see kind of how the number of the garden reports versus how it's ranked on the Ontario list. You can kind of compare. And common buckthorn was ranked as invasive by all of the participating gardens that reported it. Let's see, tree lilac, 3 were potentially invasive, 1 watch list. Black locust, all gardens all said that was invasive as well. So interesting to see that. And for these species here, these were all reported by at least 3 gardens, and pretty good agreement between what the province has recognized and what gardens are noticing in terms of English ivy and Siberian squill, and actually Cornus moss, which both consider to be watch list plants. All right, I want to briefly talk again about Amur cork tree. It's such an interesting plant. This one, there's pretty good consensus that it's invasive or at least potentially invasive. You do see that kind of regional aspect to the data again. This one's important if you are doing management because it's a good idea to maybe remove those fruit-bearing trees, but You do want to monitor the males as well because they can sometimes spontaneously produce fruit on one or more of the branches. So that was good to keep in mind. And I want to share this because the Royal Botanic Garden, who we're going to hear from in a minute, was really generous in providing this for us to showcase how they're dealing, what they're seeing in terms of Amur cork tree on their own property. And I'll just share what they shared with me is that they said this is the distribution on their property. The yellow is where it's the densest, blue is where it's most sparse. They said these maps do not show the full extent of the infestation. They haven't had time to inspect the entire property, but they anticipate finding more. They just really wanted to show how the species can rapidly spread, and they have observed it growing rapidly through intense non-native honeysuckle infestations, and that has posed an additional challenge in terms of finding and then managing the cork tree. But they have had some success both girdling and pulling it, and for larger infestations or trees where that's difficult, they have used herbicide in some cases. So we do have an alert on that species as well, and you can see the recommendations are a little different here because the seed is such an important vector to consider. Removing the fruit-bearing trees is also important, and also not selling or planting the fruit-bearing trees. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up here. If you are affiliated with Public Garden, we would love for you to get involved as well. We'd love to see more participation across Canada. We have an introductory webinar on January 8th, and you can also sign up for our newsletter. And thank you to everybody, all of our working group members and all of those organizations that have made this program possible.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle and Teresa. That was very interesting. And our next presentation is Nadia Kavalan. And I think this was a really great segue from the alert system to something more local within Ontario. This topic will be on identifying botanical hybrids and cultivars, which magnolias are escaping from the arboretum, using next generation sequencing to identify the culprit. And Nadia Kavalan is from the Royal Botanical Garden, and she's co-presenting with Adeline Gagnon, Assistant Professor, University of Guelph. So welcome, Nadia.
Perfect. Thank you for the introduction. So I will be presenting this PowerPoint. Evelyn is also here with us, so she can answer any questions that you have as well. There we go. Let's start with some context. Royal Botanical Gardens is located where that blue place marker is. We are in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Huron-Wendat nations. We are on the western tip of Lake Ontario, where that yellow arrow is. In the context of Canada, we're pretty far south. And here we are again, where you can see, I'm just going to get my little pointer. Laser pointer, here we go. Okay. So this is the western tip of Lake Ontario. It ends in Cootes Paradise Marsh right here. Royal Botanical Gardens is this part of the green area right here. We are in a very urbanized area, and we are connected by ecological corridors to other conservation areas over here that are owned by other organizations and conserved by other organizations. Anything that becomes invasive on our property is most likely going to wind up on their properties as well. For today's talk, I'll be focusing on the area around the Arboretum, which is right there where the laser pointer is. Okay, so RBG, I'm going to be referring to Royal Botanical Gardens as RBG. We have about 2,150 acres of land, and 90% of that is conservation land. Only 10% is cultivated gardens and other infrastructure. The pictures that I'm showing you here are from the Arboretum. So the picture on the left is Magnolia cobus, that it's an accession tree growing in our Arboretum. And on the right-hand side, there is a picture of another Magnolia cobus, but this one wasn't planted. This one's growing spontaneously in the forest adjacent to the Arboretum. It's about 200 meters away from the one in the picture on the left. And we have the first recorded observation at RBG is this herbarium specimen, and I believe it's the first one recorded for Canada as well. I haven't found any others yet. And we identified this, it was collected in 2000. And the collector had found about a dozen of them, and they were only 15 to 20 centimeters tall, and they were just about in the same location as the spontaneous magnolia from the previous slide. And we identified this just based on morphological traits. So around 2014, a colleague and I went out to the forest where the spontaneous magnolias were, took some samples, brought them back to the Arboretum collection, and compared the samples to every single tree in that Arboretum so that we could identify this plant. It did not have flowers. They were too small, right? So we had to identify them vegetatively. And based on those traits, we determined that it was Magnolia cobus. But determining these plants is not that straightforward because they occur right next to an arboretum that has so many Magnolia species and cultivars in them. The probability that the other plants are contributing to the genetics of the escape population are pretty high. We just can't see it morphologically. Okay, let's explore just how much of a problem these magnolias are. Let's take a look at how densely they grow and the habitats that they can grow in. The picture on the right is a dense hedge of magnolias. They're about 1.5 to 2 meters high, and they are growing right on the forest edge, immediately adjacent to the magnolia dell of the arboretum. The picture on the left, on the other hand, is about 500 meters away from the magnolia dell. And these seedlings are growing in the interior forest, so they can grow densely and they are not restricted to the forest edge. And let's take a look at how far they can travel from the source. Okay, so we have a picture on the left from 2014, on the right from 2025, and they're at different scales. So this circle here in the middle is the parking circle of the Arboretum. Here is where the magnolia collection is. And the shaded areas are where the escape populations of magnolias are, with that dense hedge I was telling you about earlier. It's right here. This is the red part. And the lighter the shade, the less dense the magnolia infestation is. So from the collections to here is about 500 meters. Now looking at 2025, this tiny circle here is that parking circle. This little red arrow points to a trail intersection, which in the 2014 picture is here. And this is how much further the magnolias have spread in 11 years. We even have some satellite populations all the way out here and all the way down here. Now, these are about 2 kilometers away from the magnolia collection that is over here. So they have spread an extra 1.5 kilometers in about 11 years. So we're controlling them. We have been since 2015. I only have the numbers for the last few years. The point I want to make with this slide is we are pulling them out by the thousands sometimes. So we obviously can't continue to just pull the escaping magnolias. We have to remove the source, but there are challenges associated with this. And the first challenge is, which trees in the collection are the source of these spreading magnolias? There is some morphological variation in the spreading population, and this introduces some uncertainty in our identification of them as Magnolia cobus. And the other is that this collection is very valuable to RBG. Many of these trees are older than 80 years. They attract loads of visitors every spring during flowering time. And so our needs are, above all, to protect the ecosystem from this newly establishing invasive species, but also to maintain a sustainable magnolia collection that continues to attract visitors. And we really need to know which magnolia it is. So I'd like to just point out some challenges that, these are general challenges that botanical gardens arboreta face. One, we grow many species that would not grow together in the wild. The ranges don't overlap, and we grow them close together in our gardens. We grow cultivars that can be non-fertile if it's grown alone, but we grow them together with other cultivars. And when they're grown together, they can cross-pollinate and make babies. And third, the offspring from cultivars don't look like their parents. Cultivars are propagated by cloning. This is how they all look the same. So if they reproduce sexually, they don't look like the parents, and it makes it difficult to pinpoint whether any particular cultivars are the parents of the offspring. So the question could be, which magnolia is it? Or it could be, which magnolias are they? And we thought genetics would be the solution to this question. So in 2022, we sent some magnolia samples to the Agriculture and Food Lab at the University of Guelph, where they used DNA barcoding. And the results we got back were inconclusive. That method did not work to identify our plants. And as far as we know, this is the only technique that is available for the public to who want to send in samples for DNA analysis. So the obvious solution was partnership. And in 2024, we partnered with Dr. Edelyn Gagnon at the University of Guelph. And we learned from Edelyn that DNA barcoding is a very powerful tool for all organisms with mitochondria, which plants are not. And so she selected a plant-appropriate method for identifying the magnolias using genetics and also within RBG's budget. And in the fall, we went out to the Arboretum. We collected magnolia samples from across the primary area of spread. We didn't go to the 2 satellites I showed you earlier. And from the Arboretum, from every tree in the Arboretum collection, well, a subset of them. So we also applied for a MyTax grant, and we were successful with it. And MyTax is another important part of the solution for us. These grants connect together researchers with industry and with nonprofit organizations. And with that, we were able to hire a work-study student who processed the samples during the winter semester. When we were out collecting plants in the Arboretum, Magnolias are a large genus. There are about 250 species, and they are divided in 2 sections. Magnolia cobus is in a section called Eulania. And so we collected every tree in our Arboretum collection, from every tree in our Arboretum collection that was in the subsection Eulania. And also Magnolia acuminata. That's not in the same section, but it's our native magnolia and it's an endangered tree. We wanted to know if the escaping magnolias could be cross-pollinating with the Magnolia acuminata, because if they were, then that was going to introduce a brand new threat to this already endangered plant. So once we had our samples, Edelyn put it through flow cytometry to measure their genome size. And it turns out that all of our escaping magnolias all were diploid and all had a genome size of 4 gigabytes. So with that, we selected the magnolias from the Arboretum, the samples from the magnolias from the Arboretum that also were diploid and also had a genome size of 4 gigabytes. And those were the samples that we sent in for DNA analysis. This reduced the number of samples that we had to send in, and it reduced the cost of the project. And this was the result from the DNA analysis. This is a phylogenetic tree. All of these samples that are in black text, these are from escaped magnolias. In blue and in orange are samples that were from the Arboretum. So where the samples of the escaped population are, where they are located in the tree tells you which plant they were most closely related to. And we learned from this 2 things. 1, multiple trees in the Arboretum were misidentified, and I'll come back to that. But very importantly, we figured out that the escape populations are most closely related to 3 species: Magnolia cobus, Magnolia stellata, and Magnolia X lubneri. Magnolia stellata is so closely related to Magnolia cobus that at one point it was considered to be a subspecies of it. And Magnolia X lubneri is the hybrid between Magnolia cobus and Magnolia stellata. Okay, so in May, when the magnolias are flowering, we went back to the Arboretum so that we could figure out what is going on with these misidentified trees. And we learned something really fascinating and really important. The problem was these were cultivars for which the scion died and the rootstock took over. The rootstock was Magnolia cobus, and that's because Magnolia cobus is the hardiest of the cultivated magnolias. So in this picture here, this trunk that's outlined in red, this is Magnolia cobus. And notice how it has really low branches here. And this one here is Magnolia yellowbird. They are all growing out of the same tree here. There are no lowdown branches for Magnolia yellowbird. So when we went out in the fall and there were no flowers, we obviously sampled from these lowdown branches that we could reach. So with the identification corrected, if we look at this phylogenetic tree again, we can see that Magnolia cobus it contributes the majority of the genetics to the escaped population. But there still is a little bit of Magnolia salata here and a little bit of Magnolia lobnaria here. So is this just an RBG problem? It is not. And we turned to iNaturalist to figure this out. There are lots of observations for Magnolia cobus on iNaturalist. You do have to weed through every single one to figure out which one is cultivated and which one is wild. So for the wild ones, there are some a little bit further southwest of us here. This is the observation on the screen right now is from Turkey Point. There are others in New York State and Pennsylvania. So what's next? RBG's next challenge is, well, we're going to have to remove the source plants. These are very highly appreciated charismatic plants, so it's going to require a lot of conversation and some very careful planning to do this so that we do it right, so we put the right message out there. And I'd like to end with a call to action for plant breeders and growers, and that's to keep informed on plants observed to escape cultivation, check in with PGSIP for the latest information, and please avoid using potentially problematic species as rootstocks after you learn that they are potentially problematic. So with that, thank you very much. My email address and Edeline's email address are on the screen. Please email us if you have any questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Nadia. It was very interesting and interesting to learn about some of the challenges of hybridization and the cultivars and trying to identify them. For me, white and red mulberry often comes to mind as one. And we're going to move on to our next speaker, Carolyn Calican, Senior Conservation Biologist for the Canadian Wildlife Federation. And she's going to talk about a national native seed strategy to support restoration across Canada. And after that, we'll have about a 5-minute Q&A, and then we'll wrap up with some closing remarks. So welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you very much, Vicki. Happy to be here. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for hanging in. I think this is the last presentation of the day. So I'll be speaking about a National Native Seed Strategy framework that Canadian Wildlife Federation has been building over the past number of years. This work was funded by Environment and Climate Change Canada under their Nature Smart Climate Solutions Fund. And we applied for the fund with our partners Carolinian Canada to build the Southern Ontario Native Seed Strategy. And we've been working with them on this dual project for since 2021. Our work focuses on non-tree seed, it's forbs and grasses. And our efforts were to build a multi-stakeholder collaborative framework to inform the development of a national native seed strategy. And we feel that appropriately a native seed strategy should be completed and signed off by the federal government. So our intent is really to build the framework for that. We feel that we need to support a sustainable supply of ecologically appropriate native plants across Canada. And we are rather behind the US. We're about 15 years behind the United States in the building of a national seed strategy. So over the period from late 2021 through early 2024, we engaged about 260 stakeholders across Canada, which include native plant experts and seed users in different sectors. We had monthly advisory meetings. We built focus groups, Indigenous knowledge and leadership, biodiversity conservation, native plant growers, policy and planning, prairie region, Southern Ontario, BC and Western region, and the Atlantic region. So we had conversations with folks over the couple of years to build out a framework. We also engaged with the federal government across different departments through the Green Budget Coalition. And this is a coalition of around 25 national environmental groups that advise the government, federal government each year on how to green the federal budget. So through that process, we were able to engage numerous government departments on a national seed strategy. We also conducted a native seed stakeholder survey. And then we did more in-depth interviews with some of the U.S. groups, the U.S. Bureau of Land Management, who is leading the effort with their native seed strategy, and their Department of Agriculture. We also engaged with the U.S. Institute of Applied Ecology through their native plant partnerships, the Society for Ecological Restoration, the Canadian mining industry, and the National Tree Seed Center. Our native seed survey, we had 203 completed surveys, and that was across seed producers, Indigenous community members, restoration practitioners, and government agency staff across all levels of government. We found through this survey that 85% of native seed producers indicated that they could expand their native seed production or wild harvest with assured demand, and that's bold. That's in bold because it's really important to native seed producers that there is assured demand. Otherwise, they're taking a lot of business risk in building up without the demand being assured. And also, we found that if support was available, most native seed producers would research seed growing practices and do more restoration monitoring. We also engaged Indigenous communities through our collaborator, Tiffany Traveris, who's a Secwempemc land and seed steward. And she builds and runs native seed schools throughout the interior Salish region. I'm not going to read this out loud. I'm going to pause for a moment so that you can read that. I don't want to appear to be representing the Indigenous communities, but this was facilitated by Tiffany Traveris, and this is what she supplied us. I find that to be a very impactful and really important statement. Okay, I'm going to go through some of the challenges that we identified through all of the engagement over the few years that we did this to increasing native seed supply in Canada. Number one, the lack of forecasting and native seed needs for restoration is an impediment to the growth of the industry, and that ties back to the assured demand. So many of us, and that would be Canadian Wildlife Federation, also, we order on an as-need basis rather than thinking ahead of what we need and then work in conjunction with the suppliers. There is a lack of understanding of Indigenous leadership and knowledge outside of Indigenous communities. Funding cycles for restoration projects are mismatched with production for native seed and seedlings. So for example, it would take 3 to 5 years to appropriately scale up native seed production. Often the funding cycles are less than that time period. We might get a 1 or 2 or 3 year grant. So because of the mismatch, it makes it challenging to scale up. I'm happy to say that the next challenge is struck out. Why? Because we now have a native seed producer group. We didn't when we started, and one has formed, the Native Seed Producers of Canada. I've included the website there. Please go check it out. And I'm really happy to see that that has happened. Number 5, producing native plants comes with the additional cost and risks not incurred by standard horticulture or agricultural sectors, and that drives up the cost of native plant seeds as compared to non-native turf and cover crops used to revegetate degraded land. So there's been a whole bunch of past research, cost sharing support put into the non-native turf and cover crop industry that hasn't happened with native seed. So it's not really an even playing field. Number 6, there is a lack of dedicated government infrastructure to support the native seed industry in Canada, and that is quite unlike the United States, where the Bureau of Land Management has infrastructure. They have dedicated funding to support the industry, and they're a main purchaser of the supply as well. Number 7, Tracking and labeling of native seed origin in Canada is inconsistent and unregulated, and that prevents policies that specify the use of native plants of local origin from being developed. Number 8, there's a lack of procurement policies or guidelines across Canada that can favor the use of native plants in restoration. Number 9, there's inadequate training and job opportunities for native seed production, and there's a lack of integration of Indigenous knowledge with restoration programs. And finally, there are gaps in scientific research and knowledge of native plant restoration, including propagation, local guidelines, ecosystem reference, and species, even species lists from which to create reliable seed mixes. So to sum up, we have a lot of work that needs to be done as a broad community in Canada. Okay, so we did receive implementation funding for 2 years, and that will wrap up next March 2026. And the key areas of delivery are to assess the native seed capacity by growers across Canada and to be able to map regional gaps. When we know what's being produced and where, then we can map the gaps, particularly geographical. We're seeking feedback from native seed growers on our draft recommendations. If any of you are native seed producers, please get in touch with us. We would love to get your feedback on our draft recommendations. We are continuing to engage the federal government departments on the notion of a native seed strategy. We've had many conversations, and it is a challenge to build up to a level at which everyone understands the need for a native seed strategy and the important role that native seeds play in meeting, for example, our biodiversity strategy targets. And then finally, build a native seed partnership for Eastern Ontario. And of course, we have SAWS, and SAWS continues to be implemented through shared funding. Okay, I'm just going to spend the last few moments talking about the Native Seed Partnership of Eastern Ontario. And I will say that the key staff that we've had on this project is Stefan Weber, Holly Abandonado, and Jeanette Huppe. And Jeanette is our current Native Seed Program Coordinator, and she's coordinating the Native Seed Partnership of Eastern Ontario. So the goals of the Native Seed Partnership of Eastern Ontario are to strengthen the regional native seed sector, foster relationships between seed producers, seed users, facilitate knowledge sharing through webinars, through regular meetings, and to help all of that to help scale up the native seed production. And I should add too that the Southern Ontario Seed Strategy has 4 native seed partnerships, native seed and plant partnerships, and we are integrating and feeding into each other's webinars, for example. Okay, so this is new. We started it in the summer. It was launched in the summer. We have native seed and plant producers in our group. We have seed users from municipal, provincial, and federal government. We have conservation authorities, land trusts, and restoration practitioners and NGOs. And we have about 80 participants so far in this group. That includes other stakeholders as well. We have virtual meetings. We haven't met in person. We've had virtual meetings. We've hosted webinars. We are planning an in-person gathering with SAWS for the winter time, and that's a really important meeting. The first day will be Indigenous only, and that's facilitated by Sam Warai at Carolina, Canada, as well as Guyanase Native Seed Nursery. And then the second day will be a general gathering, and our primary task there is to build a consolidated 5-year demand from the various purchasers and present it to the seed and plant producers for their response. It's an exercise, and it's a way of moving forward in the next level up of what we need to be doing. We'll also be conducting surveys of seed producers and consultations to finalize our recommendations and our draft and our report. And that kind of rounds out the work that we're doing on the Native Seed Strategy and our Eastern Ontario Native Seed Partnership. If you want to get in touch, there's Jeanette's email, we're happy to hear from you. And thank you very much for the opportunity to present today, and looking forward to questions.
Great. Thank you very much, Carolyn. It was interesting just to, especially to hear those points on why scaling up native seed supply is a challenge.
So I want to thank everybody who joined us today for day one of our Growing Solutions Conference. It's certainly been a full afternoon, and we really appreciate you spending time with us. Today, we heard a strong call to think 100 years ahead and to consider how we're leaving the planet for the next 7 generations. And I loved the prevention requires partnership comment. Speakers today highlighted the importance of training, collaboration, clear communication, and maybe starting outdoor education early, as well as celebrating community heroes and resources like PlantWise and Grow Me Instead. We also heard about emerging cross-border species risks, new tools to detect hybrids and cultivars, as one of our attendees said, real botanical detective work. I thought that was really awesome. And a national seed strategy to support restoration. It was a really great day with a lot of learning to process. I want to sincerely thank all of our speakers for sharing their time, expertise, and insights, and to our amazing team behind the scenes for making everything run mostly smoothly. We got over those hiccups, so it was really a great day. And to those who made this event possible, Environment and Climate Change Canada and the Green Shovels Collaborative, thank you. So once again, thanks everyone, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.